Just over 50 years ago, it was June 10th, 1968, a former Binghamton High School teacher was murdered in northern New York. The case has never been solved. It's an astonishing story, and we're going to talk about it now with a niece of the former Binghamton North High School teacher, Irene Izak, who died early in the morning of June 10th, 1968. Joining us now is Lisa Caputo. Lisa, good morning.
Good morning, Bev.
And I thank you so much for joining us. I spoke with you and some other family members on Saturday and Sunday about the tragic events that happened 50 years ago this weekend. And I thank you so much, you and some of your other family members, for speaking with me about this sad, sad story.
Well, we thank you for remembering my Aunt Irene.
So it happened 50 years ago yesterday. I'm looking at the front page of our Binghamton newspaper. The story shocked people back then. A former Binghamton school teacher was murdered early today on Wellesley Island near Alexandria Bay. Said she was beaten to death within an hour after a state trooper had cautioned her about speeding. It seems from everything I've read and heard that your aunt, Irene Izak, was such a special person, and she had accomplished a lot during her short life.
She did. I was only about 4.5 years old when she was murdered, but so I have, only a few memories of her, but all of them are wonderful. She used to come and visit us. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and she would come and visit with us and bring us, candy every time when she would visit, so we'd be excited about that too, of course. But my memories of her are sitting outside and playing with our pet rabbits, and I just remember how kind she was and how excited we always were to see her, and how pretty she was, and like you said, very special.
So many people have remarked about her smile, remarked about her kindness, even though she taught at Binghamton North High School, I believe, for only 3 years. She taught French language.
Mm-hmm.
She seemed to have had a real profound impact on those she worked with and her students.
Yeah, and of course I didn't find out till later on. A lot of her former students and colleagues started contacting us through phone calls and emails and letters and on social media to say, wonderful things about her, which meant a lot to our family, how kind she was, what a great teacher she was, all positive.
Let's look back to June 10th, 1968. As you mentioned, you were not even 5 years old yet, but
Mm-hmm.
you knew from what was going on that something terrible had happened in your family.
Right, because it was, the summer, and our mother was, giving us ice cream, and I recall my father coming home and asking all of us to go outside, and then we all recall my mother screaming and crying, and we didn't really understand what was going on because they, kept her from us, and, we were all so young. We were all right in a row, like I was 4.5, and, we were all very young. But, and then after that, it obviously was very upsetting to my entire family, but my grandfather was a Ukrainian Catholic priest, and so it was also a big story in the Scranton area. But obviously they took it very hard, and maybe too also back then, not as much now, when somebody was murdered, maybe people, because they didn't want to upset you, didn't talk about it, about, the person who was murdered and what happened. So, and also in respect to my grandparents, who were very upset, it kind of, we didn't talk about it for many, many years because it just got everybody upset.
The story of the family is intriguing, too. The fact that the family came to the United States after managing to get out of Ukraine and then Austria, and it was a few years before the family wound up settling in the Scranton area. There was some time spent, I believe, in Connecticut and then Philadelphia and Brooklyn. But
Right.
but the story, just the fact that the family came to America to be happy, that with getting to the United States and feeling that, as one of your relatives told me over the weekend, we were so happy to be in America. We'd be free and we'd be safe here.
Exactly. That they'd be safe. Yeah. Who would have ever known what would happen? But yeah, she was only, well, they arrived in the United States in April of 1948, and my aunt Irene, who we affectionately called Lala, that means little doll in Ukrainian, she was only like 6 years old. And like you said, she was very accomplished. She went to Marywood College here in Scranton and got her teaching degree. And then she also went to France and studied at the Sorbonne. And as you also said, she taught French at Binghamton North High School, and then after that in Rochester East High School. And then she made that fateful trip for a job interview in Quebec. They were hiring a school district up there. Were hiring English teachers. Someone had told her, I can't remember who, and that's why she headed up that way.
And the circumstances surrounding this have puzzled people for so long. With a state trooper who said that he pulled her over for going too fast on Interstate 81 a little bit before 2 in the morning, and then a short time later, the same trooper is the one who said he found her body after he found her Volkswagen Beetle disabled at the side of the road. There have been so many questions since that initial account, and nothing has ever been officially resolved in 50 years.
That's correct. And there was a reporter at the Watertown Daily Times named Dave Champagne, a wonderful man, but he passed away a couple years ago. He would constantly, try to get information and put articles in the newspaper. And eventually he wrote a book called The North County Murder of Irene Izak. And there's a lot of details, in there about, from beginning to end, what ended up happening with the investigation and his involvement.
It's notable that 20 years ago, the family, after hiring a private investigator to review available evidence, to talk with investigators who had looked into the case, the family ultimately wrote a letter to Governor George Pataki asking that action be taken.
Right. What happened was, like I said earlier, we didn't really talk about my aunt's murder because, it upset my grandparents and other family members. Obviously, could understand that. And there was always a painting of my aunt hanging in my grandparents' home. And when they both passed away, I asked my mother permission to contact the New York State Police. And she gave it to me, and I wrote them a letter and just asked for information because I wanted details because I didn't really know them all. The only thing I really knew was what my mother and parents had told me, but there was a True Detective magazine after the murder that had an article in there, and my mother had it in my parents' closet, so my siblings and I used to sneak it out once in a while and read it. So that's all I really knew. So when I wrote to the state police, I thought they, no problem. It's so many years ago, they'll give me information, but they refused. They said it was an active case still. So I also asked for her. They had still some of her possessions that we figured they didn't need anymore and were, sentimental, and, our family would like them back, which was her class ring and a watch. So what happened was they agreed to send back the ring, but then I sent them another letter asking under the Freedom of Information Act for more information, and I thought, that would happen, but I was declined, and at that point I was very frustrated, and I went on the internet actually just to get information about the Freedom of Information Act, like could they actually decline it, and that's when a couple of private investigators started contacting me, and one actually in Washington wanted to help me, and then another one, Gus Pape out of Port Jervis, said he would help us and he would do it for free, that if we ended up suing or whatever, we could compensate him that way. But he's, and again, another very kind and compassionate man. But he suggested we write a letter to Governor Pataki. So that's what we did. And right after that, my mother got a phone call. They were reopening the case, going to reinvestigate. And then Shortly after that, 3 investigators came to my parents' house and met with many of our family members, and they asked permission to exhume my aunt's body, which was done in December 1998. And Dr. Michael Baden, you might recognize his name. He's a pretty famous forensic. I'm sorry, I can't think of the actual word right now.
A forensic pathologist.
Exactly. He came, and long story short, they exhumed her body. They had to send her skull down to Gainesville, Florida to be, reconstructed. And a few months later, we were contacted, told there was interesting developments, and that originally the person who murdered her dragged her over the guardrail, which was like those metal ropes at first, and down an embankment and crushed her skull with rocks. But now they told us that what actually killed her was somebody hit her with a heavy object, like not rocks, and then crushed her skull with the rocks. So we waited longer, and there was a lot of different. I have to obviously watch what I say, but there was a lot of discussion that something was going to happen, arrest was going to be made, and everything. But it didn't pan out, and that's where we are now.
And unfortunately, because of the death of the person who many people believed was responsible for Irene's death, this evidently is going to be a case that just never has a resolution.
Right. Yeah, because he's passed away, and I did write him many letters, sent them certified, so I know he received them, in kind letters asking, could he give me more information about that night, and I never, no response. So we thought out of compassion maybe he would speak to our family, but there was silence.
But no reply ever?
None. Never.
So here it is, half a century later. I know some family members did realize that yesterday was the 50th anniversary of the loss, but I believe till I contacted you actually had not realized that the 50th anniversary was on Sunday.
Well, actually, I did. I always, remember, and actually where I live, the cemetery where my aunt and grandparents and my aunt and other relatives are buried are only about a mile from my home, so I do visit, the cemetery, but I know a lot of other people have forgotten, you go on with your daily life, but, we'll never forget her.
Well, it just still must be so difficult for the family, even decades later, to have had to deal with this loss, to cope with the loss, and then with an investigation that never resolved a thing.
Yeah, because we really had our hopes up many times, and then, like I said, nothing ever became of it. I don't know what happened many years ago, when the original investigation, I know what we were told, and things were different then or handled differently. I do believe that, when the case was, reopened, I do believe the New York State Police did everything that they could, to make an arrest. But, some evidence that they had with DNA not existing, or there wasn't enough of certain evidence left that they couldn't, go ahead and make an arrest.
Do you think some people tried to cover up what happened?
I don't know. I don't want to say definitely, but there always has been talk that happened. Again, I think it was a different time back then. Things were handled differently. But now though, what happened? Like I said, the reinvestigation. I do think that they did everything that they could. They were very compassionate to us. They even had some of our family members up to Albany after, and which from what I understand, is never done, and did give us a lot of information, even though it was an open case. And they were very, very kind to us.
Lisa Caputo, thank you so much for joining us and talking about your aunt, Irene Izak, 50 years after her death.
Thank you very much, Bob. It really means a lot to me and to my family that you remembered her.
You're in my thoughts and prayers.
Thank you very much, Bob.